She said if you really trusted me, you wouldn't need to ask so many questions. I am 31 years old and work as a logistics manager for a shipping company. I met Nora 2 years ago at a business expo in Lagos. She was 28, radiant, and spoke with the kind of confidence that filled a room. She had this magnetic charm that made people lean in when she talked. I was one of them. Within weeks, we were inseparable. I thought I had finally met someone who understood both my drive and my humor. At first, everything felt effortless. She would call me between meetings, send photos of her lunch, tell me about clients who annoyed her. I liked how open she seemed. But somewhere in the middle of that first year, the openness began to close. Her phone started living face down on the table. Notifications became secrets. When she went out after work, the stories grew shorter. She would say she was at a client dinner, but never mention who was there. I remember the first time my stomach turned. It was a Thursday night. She came home later than usual, smelling of perfume I didn't recognize. She said she had been meeting her team to plan a campaign. I believed her because I wanted to. But the next morning, her car had 60 extra kilometers on the meter, and she hadn't left the city. When I asked about it, she laughed and said maybe I should stop tracking her like a detective. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone has a right to privacy. She was independent, confident, not the clingy type. But the distance kept growing. She started answering questions with more attitude than clarity. I would ask who she was having lunch with, and she would shrug and say coworkers. I would ask why she came home so late, and she would say traffic, then change the subject. One evening, we were supposed to have dinner with friends, but she called last minute and said she had to stay late at work. I decided to surprise her, to bring food to her office. When I arrived, the building was nearly empty. The security guard told me the marketing team had left hours ago. I stood in the parking lot staring at her empty spot. She called 10 minutes later saying she was still in a meeting. I told her to enjoy it and hung up. I didn't mention what I had seen. From that day, something shifted in me. I stopped trying to prove what I felt. Instead, I started watching. The details spoke louder than her words. The new perfume that appeared on her dresser. The necklace I hadn't bought. The weekend she said she was visiting her cousin, but forgot to pack clothes for the trip. It was like watching a puzzle complete itself in slow motion. One night, I asked her directly if she was seeing someone from work. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She just exhaled sharply, shook her head, and said that line that burned itself into my memory. If you really trusted me, you wouldn't need to ask so many questions. She said it calmly, like a teacher correcting a student. In that moment, I realized she had turned my effort to understand her into a flaw. My concern had become control. My love had become suspicion. I sat there in silence while she looked at her phone and scrolled through messages she didn't want me to see. After she went to bed, I sat alone on the couch thinking about every time I had apologized for simply wanting honesty. I thought about how she always demanded trust without ever earning it. And for the first time, I stopped blaming myself for being curious. I wasn't jealous or insecure. I was exhausted from pretending not to notice what was right in front of me. That sentence she used to silence me became the moment I woke up. I realized trust isn't about closing your eyes and hoping someone will do right by you. It is about transparency that doesn't need to be begged for. I looked around our apartment and felt like a guest in a life built on half-truths. When she came out of the bedroom to grab water, she smiled faintly and asked if everything was fine. I smiled back and said yes, even though something inside me had ended. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling until morning, already knowing that the version of me who kept giving her the benefit of the doubt was gone. She thought I was still the man who believed every soft explanation. But I was done asking questions she didn't want to answer. For the first time, I trusted my own silence more than her words. The night of the company gala felt like the final test of patience I didn't know I was taking. Nora had talked about it for weeks, how important it was for her career, how she needed everything to go perfectly. I offered to help because some of her colleagues knew me from previous events and I wanted to show support. I arrived early, helped arrange tables, greeted her boss, and tried to act normal even though deep down I already felt like something was off. Nora arrived an hour later than she said she would. She looked stunning, wearing a dark blue dress that caught the light every time she moved. For a moment I forgot the doubts and just stared, remembering why I had fallen for her in the first place. But then I noticed how she avoided eye contact when I complimented her. She gave a quick smile, kissed my cheek, and drifted into a group of coworkers as if I were just another guest. The evening went smoothly at first. Speeches, laughter, champagne. Everyone seemed to be celebrating something invisible. I stood near the buffet table talking to one of her teammates when I saw her on the balcony. She was with a tall man in a gray suit, the same man whose name I had seen pop up several times on her phone before she quickly hid it. Their bodies leaned close, the kind of closeness that doesn't happen by accident. He said something, and she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in months, soft and familiar. Then their hands brushed, not clumsy or quick, but slow and deliberate. My chest tightened. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But when she looked around and quickly stepped back as if caught, I knew. I walked toward them slowly, giving her every chance to meet my eyes, to show a trace of guilt or courage. She didn't. When she saw me, she froze for a second, then forced a smile. She said, "This is Daniel, my team lead. He's helping with logistics tonight." Her voice was too quick, her tone rehearsed. Daniel extended his hand, smiling in that polite, confident way men do when they believe they have already won. He said, "You must be the boyfriend." His tone carried a hint of amusement, something that told me he knew exactly who I was and what was happening. I took his hand, firm grip, steady eyes. I said, "Yeah, the one who asks too many questions." The words came out calm but sharp, the kind that don't need to be shouted to land. For a moment, the air changed. The music from the ballroom faded behind us, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that made even Daniel glance away. Nora looked like she wanted to disappear. I let go of his hand, set my drink on the nearby table, and turned to her boss, who happened to be passing by. I thanked him for the invitation and told him it was a wonderful event. Then I walked out without looking back. People probably thought I was being polite. They didn't see that I was walking away from the last illusion I had about her. Outside, the night was warm, the city buzzing with traffic and laughter from nearby restaurants. I stood by my car for a moment, breathing in the quiet. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't racing. It felt empty, almost peaceful. I drove home with the windows down, the wind cutting through everything heavy. Every mile between the gala and my apartment felt like a chapter closing. When I got home, I didn't pace or cry or call anyone. I sat on the couch, loosened my tie, and just stared at the ceiling. The silence wasn't painful anymore. It was freedom. My phone buzzed over and over again. Her name flashed on the screen, followed by short messages. "Where did you go? Why did you leave? Please answer." I didn't. I turned the phone face down, the same way she used to do with hers. As the night stretched on, I realized I didn't need a confession. The truth had already spoken for itself. I could see it in her eyes when she introduced him. I could feel it in the way his confidence carried her silence. Every question I had ever asked had been answered in that one brief moment on the balcony. By the time the sun came up, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. I packed a small bag, drove to my mother's house, and told her I needed a few days away from the city. She made breakfast without asking questions, as if she already knew. Sitting there, eating quietly while the morning light filled the kitchen, I realized something important. Trust doesn't vanish in one night. It dies slowly, question after question, until you finally stop asking. And that night, at the gala, I stopped completely. I didn't lose Nora. I simply returned to myself. The morning after the gala began with a silence that felt louder than any argument. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, lighting up the room with notifications. Dozens of messages poured in from Nora, each one more desperate than the last. At first, she accused me of humiliating her, claiming I had overreacted and ruined her night. Then her tone shifted to soft apologies, long paragraphs filled with explanations that sounded rehearsed. I read every word once, then set the phone down without replying. For the first time since I met her, her words had no power. I drove to her apartment that afternoon, not to talk, but to end things properly. The hallway smelled like her favorite vanilla candles. I walked through the rooms that used to feel like home and started packing quietly. Every drawer I opened felt like closing another chapter. I left my key on the kitchen counter beside a photo of us she had framed last year. It was from a trip where she had smiled the entire time while texting someone else behind my back. The memory no longer hurt. It simply reminded me how much energy I had wasted on pretending everything was fine. I moved back into my old place, the small apartment I had kept as a backup. It felt empty but clean, untouched by lies. I blocked her on every platform and silenced her number. That night, I slept deeply, without replaying any conversations in my head. The next morning, I went to work early, focused on my projects, and spoke to no one about what happened. I didn't need sympathy. I needed distance. A week passed before she showed up unannounced at my office. She stood in the reception area, eyes red but makeup perfect, wearing that same perfume I once loved. My colleagues glanced awkwardly as she asked if we could talk privately. Against my better judgment, I agreed, mostly to end the scene. We stepped outside to the parking lot where she immediately began crying. She said Daniel meant nothing. She said I had misunderstood. She said she had been under pressure and that I made her feel untrusted. I listened quietly until she ran out of excuses. Then I looked her in the eye and told her something she didn't expect. You were right. I don't trust you. But not because I asked too many questions. Because every time I did, you answered with silence. Her tears stopped for a second, as if the truth had hit harder than any insult. Before she could reply, my coworker Maya came out of the building holding 2 cups of coffee. Maya had been the one who always covered extra shifts for me when Nora needed my attention. She smiled at me and asked if I was still up for the weekend hike we had planned. I said yes and thanked her. Nora's expression changed instantly. The tears vanished, replaced by confusion and a quiet kind of anger. She realized I wasn't broken or begging for closure. I had already started to rebuild my peace, and she wasn't part of it. She left without another word. That was the last time I saw her face to face. In the following weeks, the messages from mutual friends started coming in. Some said Nora had taken time off work. Others mentioned she looked distracted during meetings. I didn't comment. I wasn't interested in her reputation. But karma, as always, doesn't wait for permission. A month later, a friend from her company called me to share something he thought I should know. Apparently, Daniel had been quietly transferred to another branch after rumors spread about their hotel reservations during company trips. The story had reached her boss. A receptionist had recognized Nora's name on 2 forms, one booked under her account and another under Daniel's, both for the same suite. The whispers grew, and by the time management stepped in, her spotless image had cracked. I didn't smile or celebrate when I heard it. I just nodded. The truth had finally done what I never needed to do myself. It exposed her. People often think revenge means making someone suffer, but real revenge is silence and success. While she fought rumors, I focused on myself. I picked up new clients, got promoted, and moved into a bigger office. One afternoon, Maya stopped by with coffee again. We talked about work, laughed about small things, and for the first time, I realized what comfort felt like. No tension, no guessing games, no walking on eggshells. Just peace. As the days turned into weeks, I stopped checking my blocked messages. I didn't care what she was saying or who she blamed. She had built her own storm, and I had simply stepped out before the rain began. She said if I really trusted her, I wouldn't need to ask so many questions. But questions are not signs of doubt. They are signs of care. The problem wasn't that I asked too many. It was that she never had the courage to answer even one. In the end, I didn't lose her. I lost confusion. I lost constant anxiety. I lost the version of myself that kept fighting to be heard. And what I gained was far more valuable than revenge. It was freedom. 3 months later, my life looked nothing like the one I had shared with Nora. I had moved into a quiet apartment near my mother's house, surrounded by trees and morning light, instead of arguments and suspicion. The first few weeks were strange, filled with silence I had to learn to enjoy. But slowly, the silence turned peaceful. I started sleeping through the night, cooking my own meals, and taking long walks without checking my phone every few minutes. I joined a weekend hiking group through a friend from work. The first trip was awkward. Everyone seemed to know each other already, and I felt like the outsider still carrying leftover pieces of another life. But by the 3rd week, I began to laugh again. There was something healing about climbing hills and talking to strangers who knew nothing about my past. Out there, under the sun, surrounded by people who didn't expect explanations, I found small pieces of myself returning. Work became easier too. My focus came back, and projects that once felt draining now felt exciting. I was promoted to lead a new department, something that had been delayed for months when my personal life was in chaos. I decorated my new office with plants and pictures from my hikes. My coworkers noticed the difference. They said I looked lighter, like someone who had finally stopped fighting unseen battles. Nora tried reaching out once. A text from a new number appeared one afternoon while I was at lunch. She said she hoped we could talk like adults, that she wanted closure. I stared at the message for a moment before deleting it. There was nothing left to close. Some doors don't need locks or goodbyes. They just stay shut because peace has already moved in on the other side. Life kept moving. I reconnected with my mother more often. She had always been gentle about giving advice. One evening, as we sat on her porch drinking tea, she said something that stayed with me. Love is not about never asking questions. It is about feeling safe enough to ask them. Her words hit deeper than any therapy session could have. Then, last week, it happened. I ran into Nora by accident at a cafe downtown. It was one of those quiet mornings when I stopped for coffee before heading to work. She was sitting by the window, alone, scrolling through her phone. I almost walked past, but she saw me and stood up. For a second, she looked exactly the same, but there was something different in her eyes. Less fire, less certainty, more emptiness. She smiled awkwardly and asked how I was. I said I was good, genuinely good. She hesitated, then asked if I was seeing someone. I smiled again and said I was seeing things clearly, finally. The words slipped out naturally, without bitterness. She laughed nervously, looked down, and said she was glad I was doing well. As I turned to leave, she spoke again, quietly. I wish you had trusted me more. I stopped for a moment, not because her words hurt, but because they revealed how little she had learned. I turned back and said I did trust you. I just stopped trusting who you were pretending to be. Her expression froze, and I could tell she had no answer for that. I nodded politely, walked out, and never looked back. That night, sitting on my balcony, I watched the city lights shimmer in the distance. I thought about everything that had happened, from the first red flag I ignored to the final conversation at that cafe. The journey had been painful, but it had taught me something that no betrayal could erase. Trust is not silence. It is not turning off your instincts to keep someone comfortable. It is not pretending you are fine with confusion. Real trust is built on honesty that stands firm when questioned. It does not hide behind excuses or turn guilt into blame. It speaks the truth even when it shakes. As the evening wind brushed against my face, I realized how far I had come from the man who once begged for clarity. I was no longer haunted by what she did or why she did it. I had stopped trying to understand her choices because understanding wasn't necessary for peace. Letting go was. She once said that if I really trusted her, I wouldn't need to ask so many questions. But now I see it clearly. Real trust doesn't fear questions. It welcomes them. It answers them with calm and transparency. It doesn't need to hide behind clever words or emotional traps. It simply exists, open and unafraid. That night, as I turned off my phone and closed my eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The kind that doesn't come from revenge or validation, but from knowing that I no longer needed answers from someone who never deserved the questions in the first place.